Alright guys, today we'll take a look at one of my favorite builds for the heavy class. This is something that has a lot of survivability, very good damage, high amounts of ammo, so you can pretty much go through mountains of enemies before ever needing a recharge. You also get a bunch of party-wide buffs that also help with reserve armor. So today we're going to go over this build right here, which is also going to be something you can build from early all the way to end game. Now, in terms of playstyle, this is going to obviously use the multi-melta. It's one of my favorite weapons in the game, also one of the best for pretty much every type of encounter, since 95% of your encounters are against multi-targets, large groups of enemies. This is going to help you a ton with that. But beyond that, it also helps with single targets. The damage is really great. It also stacks a fire damage over time, seemingly, so you can pretty much eventually catch up with damage that some of your other party mates can do, or even hold on your own if everybody has already been downed. On a sidearm, we're going to use the plasma pistol. I think this is the better option, specifically because of the higher damage when you charge it up. It's also pretty decent at taking down additional groups of enemies, 3, 4, depending if you aim properly. So overall, you have very high AoE, and with the build, we're going to be using also very good amounts of ammo. So let's go over the skill tree real quick, because everything we have here is to promote ammo regeneration and increasing our reserve ammo, both for ourselves as well as our teammates. That is why in the core category we go with the multi-kill, the fortitude, and the overwhelming power. So especially the multi-kill, this is one of your best abilities, because if you take down 5 or more enemies with just one shot from the multi-melta, this will restore back one of that ammo. So this can help a ton, since 90% plus of your enemy attacks are basically these huge heaps of enemies, which means as long as you just take down 5 or more, you're going to always be on top, constantly dealing shots when some of your other maybe party mates may already start to struggle with their ammo count. So you're always going to be on top of things, taking down enemies. The more there are, the merrier. This is where you truly shine. You don't really need much defenses because the class is high defense enough, but that's why we also went with fortitude. Your health increases by another 20%. You could theoretically go with strategic stand instead, which is going to restore even more of your contested health, but that's going to keep you immobile when you are in the heavy stance. That is why I don't really like it. You can also go with the overwhelming power. I really like this one. When you pop off that bubble, all squad members within 10 meters deal 10% more range damage. So you also buff their damage in the process, helping your party out. For the team, we go with that additional supplies, 25% more ammo capacity for everybody in the party, which means basically dealing more damage before needing to recharge, which means overall more DPS, so everybody in the party will thank you. Now, for the gear category, I went with consecutive execution, obdurate bastion, as well as the brute force, all helping with replenishing more of that ammo even more. So consecutive execution, if you take down 10 enemies in a rapid succession, this further restores equipment charge, but the cooldown is going to be 3 minutes. Now, even though you have to take down 10 enemies in a rapid succession, I found that is not really too prohibitive. Like, you can take small gaps there, like small breaks, and you're going to take down enemies, especially 10 of them, really easy. So when you're in the middle of a very difficult run and you just can't find one of those ammo crates to replenish, this can help a ton to continue to push forward until you actually reach the next zone. You're not without defenses, of course. That is why Obdurate Bastion helps a ton with your Halo, durability increasing by 20%. Not only will this help with your defense to have more of that ranged damage blocked from enemies, but it's also going to help your team members because of the overwhelming power, which now is going to last a little bit longer, providing that extra 10% more range damage to your party mates. And finally, brute force. I like this one. When your Halo is on cooldown, your range damage increases by 15%, which is absolutely crazy. I mean, 15% free damage because you're always popping off that iron Halo, and once it's down, it's on cooldown. Now you have free 15% extra range damage on top, especially helpful in single target scenarios. And finally, for the signature, you kind of have a few options over here. Personally, I went with the conversion field. When Iron Halo is active, all squad members within 100 meters regenerate ability charge 50% faster, literally reducing their cooldown in half. So let's say you have a tactical in your party and he throws in extra scans, which means debuffing enemies even more, they receive more damage, they get revealed more often. Or maybe you have, I don't know, a bulwark and he throws in a chapter banner and gives you more armor regeneration, especially in a very tough combat encounter. This is going to help your entire party so much, and the entire heavy class will help your party so much. Like I said, with ammo capacity, with extra damage, with defenses, and now also with reducing their ability charge. Literally the best party play out there. And yes, technically, I know that some of the other perks out there may seem enticing, like for example, Coolant Reserve, which completely removes overheat mechanic, especially if you really enjoy the heavy bolter or maybe that charged plasma. But you really have to look at the downsides as well. In this case, both of your other party mates have to be incapacitated or even grabbed, which means you're pretty much left alone. So having no overheat is not going to help you too much. Maybe your ammo is low, your ammo reserves are almost gone, so it's not going to help you too much to increase that DPS, if only for maybe a few seconds. But maybe somebody else in your party who got downed was dealing way higher DPS, maybe like a sniper or a vanguard. All of those could potentially deal more damage than you. So in that case, it doesn't really help that you just become a little bit more greedy for some extra damage numbers. That is why this, in my opinion, is one of the best builds out there for the heavy class. And that is why I also think that the multi-melta is one of the best options in the game. Not just for the heavy, but for any other class that may have access to a melta weapon. Now, in terms of the multi-meltas and the perk trees and abilities to choose from them, pretty much all of them can be good. So you can either go with the rate of fire, which means more DPS because you're shooting more often. You can also go with the higher range one, which means more consistency at proccing that multi-kill since you hit more enemies in the back. Or you can go with more magazine capacity, which means you go in a little bit more often before you need a recharge. But in my opinion, I think that the rate of fire one is the best option because that means more damage. And for the other two, like the range and the higher magazine capacity, you can already make up for that with some of your skills in the skill tree and some of the perks right here in the guns perk tree. That is why I typically go with that one. So let's go over the perk tree itself for the weapon and what we have. So in this case, I opted for the upper side of the tree because it just gives us everything that we need. Now, the first one is going to be increased capacity to our ammo reserve. It's going to buff that up by 20%. However, keep in mind that for this to actually trigger, you need to hold the multi-melta as your primary gun when you recharge at an ammo crate. If, for example, you just equipped your sidearm and going at the same ammo crate, this isn't going to give you that extra ammo reserve. You have to switch to the multi-melta for that extra ammo reserve to be given to you into that weapon. Then we have Elite Restoration, another way to regenerate ammo reserves by 10% when we take down Majoris or above level enemies, which is pretty much all the bigger ones, and the cooldown is really low, just 30 seconds. We also have Heavy Fire for even more fire rate by another 15%, helping us with DPS even more. We can also use Perpetual Range like how I did, further extending that by 1 meter. So like I said, we can kind of make up for the fact that we did not choose the high range variant of the multi-melta. Also in Heavy Stance, you do not lose control from heavy hits, meaning that you can just shoot at the enemies all the time. Executioner's Fire, pretty straightforward, just gives us another 25% of fire rate after we perform a finisher, so you're always in the front lines. You want to do this often, also for that, but also to regenerate your armor gauges. The next 2 points are going to be all into Heavy Might, so that means in total 30% more damage while in Heavy Stance. Heavy Stance in this case is basically when you hold down or press to hold down the sides of the weapon, which is basically all the time. This is when you start moving slower, but you also deal more damage. The high rate of fire is also much better. So yeah, basically all the time you're going to be in the Heavy Stance with this class anyway. Death Strike, this is going to just give you some extra weapon damage, but only if you take down Majoris level enemies with a melee weapon. So you only can do this with a melee attack, which means it's kind of wasted because your melee attacks are very ineffective. You don't really have a melee offhand weapon like other classes. You only have the stomp. So unless you can really time that up, you're not going to benefit from this the majority of the time, unfortunately. And finally, another increased capacity by another 20%. So ammo reserves are now in total 40%, which is very, very helpful. This means you can stay with 34 or 33 ammo when you recharge at an ammo crate, which is very, very good. You deal very high damage, you have a lot of ammo, plus you can regenerate it quite a bit from elite restoration, multi-kill, and all of the other ways. Plus, if you want some extra damage, you can definitely sacrifice that perpetual range, have one less meter of range, but also go with the Tyrannid Eliminator right here and get an extra 10% damage against the bosses. It can definitely be very helpful since you may encounter them on higher difficulties way more often, so 10% is a much, much more desirable buff than the one extra meter, but again, you cannot go wrong with either of them. Now, in terms of the playstyle, you're pretty much a frontliner constantly in the enemy's face, both because your multi-melta requires that via its limited range, but also because you deal more damage as you're closer, and of course, because you get to regenerate your ammo back as you take down more and more enemies. If ranged enemies attack you, you can just pop off a halo, which is going to protect everything behind it from ranged attacks, plus everybody in the vicinity gets an extra 10% to their ranged attack damage, which is really, really nice. And if you take down enemies or just perform finishers, this is going to keep you alive for way longer. When damage really becomes overwhelming, just perform a finisher and you can replenish contested health and also your armor gauges. That's why I really love coupling this with the plasma pistol as a secondary gun, especially if you want to conserve some of the ammo on your melta. When there's few enemies or they are far in between, you don't really want to waste those melta shots on one or two single targets. This is where the plasma pistol, especially charged, can come into play. That is why in the perk tree, we're going with everything that increases the damage, reduces the heat, and provides other bonuses to its AoE potential too. So typically that's going to be the upper tree once again. And that pretty much concludes today's video. Let me know down below in the comments, have you tried the heavy class? If not, what is your favorite so far? In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.